Previous lessons have covered how religion and spirituality can be a source of strength. But, as Dr. Exline pointed out, it is also true that, quote, as with any dimension of human experience, religion and spirituality hold the potential for both joys and struggles. When we are working with a client, Dr. Pargament and colleagues ask the question, how do we know whether religion is part of the problem or part of the solution when people encounter life crises? In this chapter, we will look at red flags that suggest the presence of a religious or spiritual problem. Until recently, even though religious or spiritual problem is a diagnostic category in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual since 1994, there was little research on such problems. However, the tide has turned, and in Dr. Exline's review of the literature, she observed that there has been, quote, a veritable tidal wave of empirical research on religious and spiritual struggle. And these studies have, quote, shown strong support for a link between religious or spiritual struggle and emotional distress. For example, studies have shown a link between spiritual struggle and distress in individuals coping with anxiety and depression, chemical dependency, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. In addition, spiritual struggle has been linked to a wide range of disorders and problems, including post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as poorer adaptation to interpersonal stressors such as divorce, childhood sexual abuse, and bereavement. A concept that overlaps with spiritual struggles is negative religious coping. Positive religious coping is a strength because it provides support and improves adaptation to stress. However, negative religious coping has a wide range of harmful effects. For example, in a meta-analysis of 8 controlled studies, Dr. Exline reported that, quote, negative religious coping was linked with greater depression. Dr. Pargament and colleagues pioneered research in this area by creating instruments to measure positive and negative religious coping, such as the 14-item Brief Religious Coping Scale. Note that the phrase religious coping also includes what could be called spiritual coping that is focused on personal practices, such as spending time in nature or meditation. In this scale, quote, positive religious coping methods reflect a secure relationship with a transcendent force, a sense of spiritual connectedness with others, and a benevolent worldview. In the ESOP assessment, positive religious coping methods are considered strengths. In contrast, negative religious coping methods reflect underlying spiritual tensions and struggles within oneself, with others, and with the divine. So what would such negative religious coping look like in the ESOP interview? Here are some items from the Brief Religious Coping Scale that a client might express as statements that would suggest the presence of a religious or spiritual problem. God has abandoned me. Or, I feel punished by God for my lack of devotion. Or, I wonder whether my church has abandoned me. In a longitudinal study of medically ill elders, Pargament and colleagues found that after controlling for the demographic, physical health, and mental health variables, higher religious struggle scores were predictive of greater risk of mortality. Since negative religious coping and spiritual struggles are associated with increased stress and other harmful outcomes, when a client shares such beliefs during the ESOP or any time in treatment, addressing them is essential to prevent associated negative outcomes and to enable the client to utilize their religion or spirituality to enhance their resilience and obtain social support. In addition, with the diagnosis of a major mental disorder, a person's religious coping style may be challenged, contributing significantly to a person's distress. For example, Dr. Hodge described how some clients have found that, quote, the onset of their mental health problem, such as depression, can interfere with their personal spiritual practices or participation in a religious community that has traditionally served as a source of support. So a mental health problem can impair religious and spiritual functioning, which can in turn trigger further declines in mental well-being. In addition, some clients can have conflicts focused on their relationships with the religious leader or members of the religious group. Quote, congregations can be sources of conflict and tension instead of support and assistance. 20 years ago, I conducted a study of the types of religious and spiritual problems that appeared in the Medline database, now it's called PubMed, which contains all the published healthcare and medical research. This table shows that the most common religious problem documented in the literature was loss of faith. Changes such as converting to a new faith, intensification of religious beliefs, and leaving a religious group were also the focus of some articles. Spiritual problems were the focus of articles on near-death experiences, intense spiritual experiences such as mystical experiences, and meditation-related problems. Articles on serious medical and terminal illnesses covered both religious and spiritual problems. These results suggest that therapists should routinely assess potential religious and spiritual problems, since some clients come to therapy with religious and spiritual conflicts and concerns. And these problems can interfere with a client being able to access their strengths and social support resources as part of their treatment programs. However, as Dr. Pargament and colleagues pointed out, it should also be recognized that religious and spiritual struggles can also lead to, quote, longer-term growth and well-being. The notion of struggle embodies the possibility of growth and transformation through the process of coping. As Dr. Exline described this, for some people, quote, when their faith is tested, it seems reasonable to believe that it could become stronger. This article on spiritual transformation among veterans in response to a religious or spiritual struggle is an example where spiritual transformation was documented to be a positive outcome from religious or spiritual struggle. When conducting the ESOP assessment, how can we identify negative religious coping? Pargament looked specifically at this question in an article on religious red flags in coping. Let's take a look at some of these red flag statements, which in this study were related to poor mental health and increased rate of hospitalization. I felt I deserved to be punished by God for my bad thoughts or actions. I am angry at God who let bad things happen to good people, or who did not hear my prayers, or was not being fair to me. Also, some people can have conflicts with church dogma or members of the congregation or clergy. Other red flags include religious passivity, for example, surrendering to God's will since nothing I could do would make a difference anyway, or passively waiting for a sign from God about what to do, as in this image of God as a father over children. Religious apathy, or what in the DSM-5 is called loss of faith, is a religious or spiritual problem, such as becoming fed up with God and the world and stopping caring about what happens. In summarizing the research findings, Pargament and colleagues concluded, quote, religiously based apathy and inappropriate self-condemnation, doubts about one's religious beliefs, and feeling at odds with God and one's religious system were correlated with problems in the resolution of negative life experiences. So eliciting and documenting such negative religious coping beliefs using the SOP allows such problems to be addressed as part of effective treatment.